Delighted to still be involved and honored to be a part of this community and this literary festival in particular, because it means that I get to have conversations about novels that I love and authors that I respect, and we're going to have a wonderful conversation here today. As many of you know about the IAAC, it's a 23-year-old organization that focuses on artists of Indian heritage, focusing mainly on the performing arts and the visual arts and the literary arts. So that's what we're here today. So I want to briefly introduce our authors, then they'll read briefly from their novels, and then we'll have a conversation about them. So just here to my right is Maulik. Maulik Puncholy is an award-winning actor, author, and activist. He is best known for the character Jonathan on NBC's hit show 30 Rock. He has many TV and Broadway accolades to his name and is now also an acclaimed author. His first novel, The Best at It, was a 2020 Stonewall Honor Book. The novel we'll discuss today, Nikhil Out Loud, was a Lambda Literary Award winner as well as a Kirkus Best Book. In Maulik's life as an activist, he served on President Obama's Advisory Commission on Asian American and Pacific Islanders, and he was is a co-founder of the anti-bullying organization Act to Change. Shastri Akella. His debut novel is The Sea Elephants, and it has been published by Flatiron in the United States and Penguin in India. He has been a writing resident at the Fine Arts Work Center and at the Oak Springs Garden Foundation. His work has been published in many magazines, including Guernica and Electric Lit. He has an MFA in creative writing and a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. So I'm based at Amherst College, and he was at UMass Amherst, so we were neighbors for many years. It's a nice coincidence. And he's now an assistant professor of creative writing at Michigan State. So he's joining us today from you went to Miami in between, but from the Midwest. So I think we'll just start with a couple of minutes of reading so you can get a flavor for the books, and the authors will maybe tell you a little bit about the book or anything that you need to know to understand the excerpt. So Maulik, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hi. Are you on book tour? Is that why you were in Miami? Amazing. I just want to say that's one of the most exhausting things I've ever done is book tour, so the fact that you're here is incredible. Thank you for that introduction. It was so nice. So my Nikhil Out Loud is, I'll try to keep this brief. When my first novel came out, The Best at It, I went on book tour. And part of doing a middle grade novel, a book for young readers, is you actually visit middle schools on the book tour. And I went to a school in Ohio that had 700 kids in the audience. It was the entire middle school. I had this amazing school visit. It was, wow, that fast. We lost one. It was this amazing school visit, and my first novel was about a gay Indian American kid, and the school visit couldn't have gone better. It was so emotional and moving, and the kids were hilarious. And 3 days later, a group of parents got angry that an openly gay author had come to their kid's school, and they shut down school assemblies, and they pulled my books off of the bookshelves. Wow. And The Best at It, my first book, has now been banned in many parts of the country.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. Although I used to sort of think that was a point of pride. People know about it, but I'm also it's very distressing, what's happening, of course. But these kids from this school started reaching out to me on social media and asking what they could do to make things better. And this was back in 2019, before we were really talking about book bans in the sort of they weren't at the forefront of the conversation. So I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to talk to 11-year-olds or 12-year-olds about what to do. This is all a long setup for Nikhil Out Loud was written in response to that. Because when I went to that school, I do voices on a cartoon called Phineas and Ferb. I play Baljeeth on Phineas and Ferb, and a lot of these kids like felt like I had a platform and they were looking at me to say something. And I wanted these kids to know that they have a platform too. So Nikhil Out Loud is about a 13-year-old Indian American boy who happens to be gay. He's the star voice on a hit animated series called Raj Reddy in Outer Space. Every week he gets to play Raj and go to outer space, and he loves disappearing into I'm just losing people like flies. They're just going. He gets to disappear into these outer space worlds, but he's not as comfortable being himself in the real world, and he has to learn to use his own voice to stand up for what he believes in. So the section I'm going to read is Nikhil and his friends are in a school musical. I know theater is a big part of your book as well. They're in a school musical. A mom from the community is protesting Nikhil being the lead in the school musical because he's openly gay. And this protest is going to happen in the school parking lot, and the kids are trying to figure out what they can do with their musical to make a statement back at this mom. I just think if Mrs. Reed's going to change the show anyway, then why don't we really change it? Mateo is whispering urgently. Deshawn, Monica, Mateo, and I are hiding in the stacks of the library, trying to keep our voices down. I slide out one of the books behind me and peek at the checkout desk to make sure Mrs. Ramani, our librarian, can't hear us. She's squinting at her old desktop computer. What do you mean, really change the show? Deshawn asks. Monica's leaned up against a row of books, her arms crossed over her chest. Yeah, like, what kind of changes are you talking about? I'm not sure. Mateo shoves his hands into the pockets of his faded jeans. All I know is that Mrs. Reed said theater makes a statement, that it makes people angry. And I don't know how singing the songs we've been rehearsing makes a statement. Monica uncrosses her arms and slowly starts pacing. I back up to make room for her. I mean, I just keep thinking if that woman's going to be there in the parking lot making all that trouble, Mateo shakes his head, then wouldn't it be cool if what we do on stage, he scrunches up his face, could, I don't know, piss her off too? My eyes widen at his language. A few kids look up from the tables in the center of the library, and I raise a finger to my lips, glancing at Mrs. Ramani. Monica stops pacing. Then she says, I think Mateo's onto something. We all face her. Have any of you considered that there's a fundamental problem with our show? And I'm not talking about all this stuff with the narrator. What kind of problem? I scratch my elbow. Her nostrils flare ever so slightly. I mean, listen, I love singing the Matilda song, I do, and Deshawn's an amazing Evan Hansen. But doesn't it bother you that none of these characters look like us? What do you mean by that? Deshawn squeezes his brows together. I mean, Monica throws a hand up, Matilda's not Korean. Evan isn't black. Oh, Deshawn sighs. Right, I know where you're going with this, but here's the thing. Maybe Evan wasn't black originally, but he's black when I sing him, and black actors have played him on Broadway, which is really important. Frustration is written on Monica's face. I know. I guess what I mean is, why do we always have to change the characters to fit us? Why can't we ever play characters who were written Korean in the first place, you know, or black, or Mexican, or... She looks at me. I mean, that's one of the things that was so cool about you playing Raj Reddy. I hold her gaze, remembering how I felt knowing that someone had written a cartoon with a lead Indian role. Deshawn shakes his head. Well, there aren't that many musicals about Korean kids, or black kids. I mean, there are some, but a lot of them aren't great for, you know, middle school. I was thinking of The Color Purple when I wrote that. He looks at her. Besides, am I only allowed to do black shows? I peer through the shelf again, but Mrs. Ramani is still poring over whatever it is she's fixated on at her computer. No, of course not, Monica says. I just wish it weren't so complicated, or there was something that we could do to make it better. I stare down at my sneakers. Even if we could, I say, what does that have to do with what Mateo's asking? Because I think what Mateo's trying to say, she goes to stand by him, is if this woman is protesting us, then maybe a way to make a statement would be if our show had more of us in it. A grin spreads across Mateo's face. Thank you, Mon. That's exactly what I was trying to say. You just said it better. The four of us chuckle quietly. Then Deshawn runs his finger along the spine of the book next to him. let's say we do try to do this. Where would we even find songs about our own experiences? Monica looks off to the side. I don't know. Maybe if no one else is writing them, we just have to write them ourselves. So that's just a little example.
Can you hear me? Well, I just want to say first, it's amazing to share a platform with two members of the literary community I admire and respect so much. Thank you for being here. Just before I read from The Sea Elephants, this is the Indian cover edition, and the cover for the Indian edition, kind of obsessed with it, so I carry it with me wherever I go. Just to preface what I'm going to read from a later section of the book, from the time I was a kid, I had this recurring nightmare of drowning in many different scenarios, and any time I was even a little bit stressed, this nightmare would come back to me. But it stopped when I turned 29, because when I turned 29, I joined the MFA program at UMass Amherst, and I came out. And as soon as I came out, the drowning nightmare just stopped. I'm sure there is a story to how those two are connected, which I'm still trying to figure out. But I came out because I started writing this novel, and I submitted this novel to my MFA workshop, and my professor, Sabina Marie, she read the manuscript and said, "This is dying to be a gay love story. Why aren't you letting it be one?" And I remember being very upset with her. I went to her office hours and said, "Why would you say that? Shagun, the main character, is asexual." And she said, "Well, here's parts in the text where he's clearly in love with Mark, the character who's now his friend." And then once she, from that outside perspective, saw what she did, it was impossible for me to not see it. So I went to therapy and came out on the last day of her workshop. And a running joke between Sabina and me is I took her workshop and had to go to therapy immediately. And she said, "I hope you're giving it some context when you state that fact." So one of the things about being in the closet is you lose the gift of listening, which is, I think, the most powerful gift in an economy of attention where there's so many things competing for our attention. Not having the gift of listening is something that I think those who are closeted have been dealing with for decades, if not longer. And that's sort of something I dealt with briefly because I was not able to talk to my biological family for quite some time. But what gave me strength and support and grounded me in my new identity that I discovered much later in life was my found family. I do think those of us who live on the fringes go out into the world and make our own families. So Amherst is the first place I think of as home because it's the first place where I was able to make my own family. And the reason I share this story with you is this section that I'm going to read from happens later in the book where Shagun's trying to escape. He's a street performer and he's also teaching street theater at a school. And he's got a boyfriend, but he has to escape town because there's a homophobic cop who's after him. So that's the section that I'm going to read. All the names that you encounter are fellow actors or their friends of Shagun. So the bed was stripped, the room empty, ready for the next occupant. When Sue came over, we took my bag to the balcony and sat on it. She pressed my head to her shoulder and let me cry. When she sensed the storm of grief had subsided for now, she let me go. "What do you want?" she asked, like from life. "I want a celebration," I said. "I want to perform something beautiful and intimate with Rue, with Saya. I want you to come see Mark and me running off into our bridal night. And oh, Ma, I want her to be there too. I mean, why not if wishes were horses and all that?" "Run off into our bridal night," Sue mocked. "You're such a drama queen." We laughed. "You want a celebration? You'll get one." Sue walked with me up one floor. My students, all 6 of them, were in Nandi's room. So were the other members of my troupe. We commenced preparations to stage my escape from the city, from the cop. We traded our clothes for costumes. The room, like our green room, was lamplit, and in the light of those flames, the bowls of makeup resembled precious stones. Green like emerald, red like ruby, blue like lapis lazuli. The only movement was the hand of our makeup man, whose brush traced the contours of our faces, leaving in its wake trails of color, bright and viscous. Nandi started to sing the song, Ruh joined him, Saya joined him, and then I did. The makeup man's mouth twitched into a smile, even as his gaze was fixed on the faces our faces were becoming. Sue and my students listened to us, and every time we repeated the chorus, they hummed along. It was a song from the Hindu romantic era, the Bhakti period, when art blurred the border between devotion and love, when a lover's home became your sacred address, and he, your lover, in all his fragile mortality, was no less a miracle than a god. Even after we stopped singing, we continued to hum, falling quiet one after the other, so that the silence that followed felt like a continuation of, rather than a punctuation to the song. We waited, sitting upright on the bed, on the floor, our hands in our lap. We heard our cue, a trumpet, a drum, a ululation, a human throat producing a sound that was in the register of birdsong. We filed down the stairs and exploded out the gate, the slow rhythm of our movement escalating into something rowdier, explosive almost, I at the epicenter, my face painted white, on my head a wig made of jute strings, surrounded by a wall of dancing bodies. Sue had my bag. From the corner of my eye, I saw the cop, a quick, blurred glimpse. 7 musicians surrounded us and drowned us in their music. In tandem, they blew the trumpets and struck the goatskin heads of their drums. We started to move like one body teeming with multiple heads and limbs. We left the alleyway behind and entered the school's main street. Then out we went, leaving the campus behind and onto Market Street. Along the way, people joined us, college students, shoppers with bags of produce, couples out on evening walks. The junta surrounded the musicians who surrounded us as we moved along. 3 winding streets later, we saw a parked minivan at one corner. The goodbyes began as we continued to move, as the musicians sustained the music at its crescendo, as strangers danced all around us. As I left the town where I met and lost the man I loved. I twirled in a circle from Nandi to Ru to Saya to Sue. I gave them each a hug, pressed their bodies to mine, pressed my head to their necks, their shoulders. 3 rounds, 3 hugs for each of these humans whom I loved and who by some crazy miracle had chosen to love me in return. The shoulder of my costume was smudged with their makeup. We slowed but didn't stop as our bodies surrounded the minivan, pushed against it, causing it to jolt back and forth. The driver slid open the back door, leaned his upper body out, and waved his fist at us. Sue slid my bag into the van. I crouched amid oppressive bodies and entered the van through the same open door. Nandi and Ru towered over the rest and pretended to argue with the driver. Lying flat, my stomach pressed to my back, I watched the face of Sue, painted blue, of Saya, painted green, the red of their eyes made redder against the surrounding palettes of color. Nandi struck the van with his fist and the driver slipped his body in and slid the door shut. Ru and Nandi pressed their hands to the van's windows and our eyes met. They were surrounded now by the people of the city. They were falling behind. They thumped the car once more with their palms and then they were gone. I closed my eyes and listened to the music and their cries, relishing this oral contact until I heard a rap on the window. Wood and glass. It was, I knew, the cop. The driver lowered his window. "This is no place to park," a stern voice said. I didn't breathe, worried that I'd be heard. The driver replied, "Sorry, sir, I stopped for a cigarette and was about to go when they almost wiped me out." My eyes were closed. The driver started the engine, and just like that, we drove away. The procession was headed for the railway station where my troop would board the train and everyone else would depart. But the cop would check my troop, as I knew he would. He wouldn't find me. The driver pulled to the side of the road about an hour later. With 2 bottles of water, I washed my makeup off. He dropped me off at the Uttarkashi railway station. As I stood at the platform with my bag and watched my train pull in, I stuffed a hand into my trouser pocket and found a piece of paper. I fished it out. Written on it in Hindi, "This isn't goodbye," signed Nandi, Ru, Saya. Mark had said those words to me in a different language. the resonance felt comforting. His promise, traveling through time, finding its place in Nandi's ink. I cried for all the tentative departures from my life, for the love that tentativeness contained. Thank you.
Thank you both for sharing those evocative passages. I wanted to start out, and this was evident in both of the passages that you read, by asking about theater and performance. And so in both of your books, theater and performance are ways for individuals, particularly young people, to find their voices. So how did you come to write about that theme? And also, are there any sort of parallel transformative performance experiences in your own lives that may have led to writing about this?
Okay. It's so interesting. Theater is it's a big part of the book, but I also feel like, and this sort of just happened organically, but that part of Nick Hill's journey in this book is that there's multiple ways that kids can stand up for themselves, and so he has a homophobic grandfather who the grandfather sort of comes to terms with him over the course of the book. Sorry, I don't want to give things away. And part of that is just the willingness to have quiet conversations at home and to show up and to understand that sometimes things like that can be challenging. The other sort of thing that happens with Nick Hill is he's 13 years old, so even though he's the star voice on a hit cartoon, his voice is changing, and the cartoon is starting to get pulled away from him. And so by the time he gets to the end of the book, not to give things away again, he has to learn to stand up to a microphone and speak up for what he believes in using his own voice. And then the third piece of that is art. Art is activism, and Suman and I were just talking about this outside. Does art always have to be about activism or not? Certainly I don't think it always has to be, but I think it sometimes can be. And so the passage that I just read, it's something that I think about a lot, and I think that younger people actually have an awareness of this and are actually pretty intelligent about the fact that they don't always see themselves in the stories around them. And so, being someone who's been on Broadway a few times now and a New York actor, the idea that there are shows out there that just don't represent my experience, or if we are part of that experience, we're so liminal and, it's not our stories front and center. I'm aware of that, and I think kids are too, so part of that passage I wrote was, these kids having, I think, a pretty adult conversation around what it means to be a person of color who wants to be in a school musical. And I spoke to so many theater teachers as I was crafting this, because I was in middle school decades ago, so I wanted to, really understand that experience, and they're like, yeah, the stuff that we have, the material that we have for kids to really explore their identities is pretty limited. And so it was important to me, I think, just to bring that experience into the book and to sort of give a space where kids have this, they could kind of see oh, there's so many ways in which you can have a voice. And one of those is actually through art. I don't know if that answered your question at all, but yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I shadowed a street theater troupe in India that travels along the Ganga from all the way from Ganga Sagar, where the river merges with the ocean, to the base camp, Gangotri, and then as an homage to the river goddess, once the last performance ends, they trek to the glacier where the river originates, and I traveled with them. And something I discovered as I traveled with them, that Hindu mythology has a lot of stories with queer characters, trans characters, non-binary characters, and I was just blown away by how, despite growing up on a lot of these stories that my grandmother would tell us, these were stories that we never learned. These characters have been censored over time through translations, and I was very fascinated by the fact that these characters exist. So when I started writing the Sea Elephants and Shagun becomes a street performer, which was very wishful as well. Sometimes you get your characters to fulfill wishes that you can't have for yourself. I'm terrified of being on stage, so I allowed Shagun to have that glory. So he becomes a street performer, and he's running from home. He's running from a homophobic father. He's running from a cop, from conversion therapy. And for him, the idea of being on the road is a form of escape. The idea of constantly being somebody else is a form of escape, because his costumes become the skin he's wearing. But at the same time, it's also empowering because he's able to play and give open voice to his queerness through these characters, and because they're couched in the context of Hindu myth, he has an audience who's willing to see him as a trans character, as a queer character, and respect that because it's part of the mythology that they've inherited. And even if it's a story they didn't know, the association with Hinduism allows for the performances and those characters to get some respect. So I think I just wanted to bring in those two, that intersection of an escape but also an expression fused into that one experience of being a street performer.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a little bit more about the use of myth and Indian texts in both of your works. I love this line in your novel, Shastri, that says about myth, "We knew little about our past, my sisters and I. Maybe that's why we loved ancient myths. Those characters became our adopted family, and their histories, when we were performing them, became our own." I think that speaks a little bit to what you were just saying. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about incorporating myth into the book, how deliberately you do that and how you weave it into the day-to-day lives of the characters. And for you, Maulik, there's Nikhil becomes very interested in the Gujarati texts that his grandmother used to teach. She was a teacher. And so if you could speak a little bit about the importance of that to your character also.
So I just as a very quick anecdote, so my grandmother used to read these stories to me, and I remember when I was 6, she read this story about the churning of the ocean, the Hindu myth where the gods and the demons sort of churn this ocean and all these treasures come out, and one of the treasures that comes out is Airavat, the elephant, hence the sea elephant, the title. And then she says, oh, and then he was so beautiful, the elephant, that the gods took him. And I interrupted her. I said, wait a minute, how can they just take him away? What happens to his family? And she said, oh, sometimes, the ways of gods are strange. I said, no, the gods are behaving like brats. And she said, oh, hey, I'm not going to read to you anymore. So she banned our storytelling sessions for a few months. But then I was so fascinated by the idea of his family left. And I think one of the powerful things for me about Hindu mythology is that it allows you to, it gives you different entry points where you can enter these stories, retell them, extend them. And I think that's true of mythology everywhere, but I'm speaking of Hindu myth because that's my experience that I'm familiar with. Which is why, like the Ramayana, you have so many retellings of it from different parts of the country in different languages. So for me, even though it was a very contemporary story, in some ways I also wanted it to feel ancient. I wanted it to have that sort of timeless element that myth has. And I knew one way I could do that is to use myths as a framing device, where characters are performing these stories, but the stories that they choose to perform also inform the main narrative about what it means to be multiple people at once. So you are a child, you are a sibling, but you're also an actor, you're also a person. And the multiplicity, which I think I was trying for Shagun to have, myth enabled that, but it also made his contemporary stories set in 90s India very ancient. And part of that was also that the idea of there's this dialogue happening in India now with the Supreme Court recently denying the same-sex marriage petition, that this is a very Western concept, which by bringing in myth, I want to say it's actually very ancient, and it's existed in India since people have existed, because queers have existed since people have existed. And myth gave me the freedom to sort of talk about these stories that I grew up with, but also by giving this story a sense of like ancientness, talk about how queerness is very much part of the DNA of Indian society.
I don't really know what else to say after that. I want to also like capitalize on something that you said just in your previous response about like performance being a way to escape, but also to like reveal. I think I'm putting words in your mouth, but before I lose that train of thought, because as an actor, as a younger actor, I thought performance was a way to disappear. Like, I was not comfortable in my skin. I thought I could, like, if I could just be an actor, I could live in all these other people's lives. And by the way, all the other people's lives that I was seeing around me, like in books and TV shows, were people who did not look like me. They were straight, white, like surfer boys, like Top Gun, like I was like, I'm gonna be Tom Cruise, As an older actor, I think of like the opportunity to perform as a way to bring my entire humanity to a performance. And so I was at a school visit recently, and there was a kid who identifies as non-binary, and they were about to play, I don't know why this school was doing this is like middle school or high school, they were gonna do Macbeth, and this kid was gonna play Macbeth, and I asked them, I said, what are you so excited about playing this role? And they were like, because I get to like escape, I get to be somebody else. And I was like, that's amazing, yes, transform all of that, but also the reason, it's a school production, so there's gonna be like 3 nights of performance, but I was like, the reason people are gonna come to see your Macbeth every single night is because you are gonna bring something that no one else playing this role can bring to it. And I just wanted to, I think it's so interesting that those themes are part of your book, and they're certainly part of Nick Hill Out Loud too, is that he thinks of his cartoon as a way to escape literally into another world, into outer space. And by the end of the book, he's like, I just want to sit here with my feet on the ground for a little bit. And I think that performance ultimately is a blend of those two things. And so I just wanted to I love that both of our books are talking about that. And then to answer your question about the grandmother in the book, used to teach Gujarati at a university in India, and when her family, when they moved to the States, there's, at the time when she moved here, there are no Gujarati language programs, and so she sort of gives up her career. And she sits with Nick Hill one day and tells him this whole story that he never knew about her. And there's a bookshelf in their living room that's like, the books are like falling off the shelves. It says stuff with books. And the reason that was so important to me is I just feel like there are so many people who do come from, for me specifically, from India, and their lives change so much here. And we don't know those stories. And I think a big part of this book is owning your story and also owning your language. And so she teaches him about her own love for language, which I think allows him to, I think in the book it facilitates his own growth into understanding the power of words. And I mentioned that he has this long journey with his grandfather that actually ends up becoming a really close relationship by the end of the book. And part of the way that relationship is bridged is they sit and read about Gandhi in Gujarati together, which I only laugh about that because there's part of me that was like, that feels so cliche, but it is also so Indian. It's so part of my narrative. And my own grandfather, my mom's dad is Jain, was Jain. He passed away. And he spent most of his life, at the end of his last few years of his life, writing about the Gita and comparing this Hindu text to Jainism, but in Gujarati. And these are words that I don't know Gujarati, so these pages and pages, I know Gujarati, I can speak it, but I can't read or write it. These pages and pages and pages they won't be available to me. And so I wanted that to be something that Nick Hill got to learn in the book.
Right. Yeah, that's wonderful. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the coming out stories that are in these books and the queer love stories, and your books are for different audiences, so maybe that can be part of your answer, how you thought about writing these stories for adults versus younger readers. And so just how you think about those stories, because there is a coming out trope, and so were you writing into that or writing against it? How did you try to make it distinctive and your own? For middle grade novels, the gatekeepers are teachers and librarians, and so I often think that middle schoolers are actually a little more advanced around relationships than teachers and librarians allow them to be. There is a little love story in here between Nick Hill and Mateo, and Nick Hill's courage allows Mateo to eventually come out to his own family, and by the end of the book they share a very chaste kiss on the cheeks, which I think is really, really sweet and cute. I have a feeling middle schoolers are doing more than kissing on the cheek, but that's all teachers and librarians will allow for them. It's so interesting because my first book is a coming out story, and for this book I wanted Nick Hill to already be out. Mm-hmm. And he's actually pretty comfortable in his sexuality. It's the dealing with the external with his grandfather, because they moved from Los Angeles to Ohio. It's dealing with this woman who's protesting the school. These are the challenges he's facing. But it's so interesting. I interact with kids a lot. I visit a lot of middle schools and high schools with my books. And
I feel like for as far as we've come in terms of like the coming out stories, there are a lot of kids who are very comfortable in their identities. But I have been to like schools in the heart of Los Angeles and visiting a gender and sexuality alliance, and we're not allowed to do a group photo, not because the kids don't want to have a photo on the internet, because these kids' parents don't know that they're part of a gender and sexuality alliance and they don't want to be outed to their parents. And so I wanted Nick Hill to be confident, but I didn't want to write a world where that was just like accepted by everybody, obviously. And so I was kind of playing in and out of the trope, I think, a little bit. You know, like Mateo has a pretty classic coming out story. We don't get to see a lot of it because he's not the lead character, but I kind of wanted to play with different aspects of where kids might be on that
Right.
line. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with something I was trying to do and did with the Sea Elephants was I didn't want to have a very conventional coming out scene where a character sits with friends or family and says, I'm gay. And instead, because I don't think that's necessarily true of a lot of South Asian queer experiences, instead, there is a moment where this family they're not necessarily very well off, so when they have guests, they have to rent furniture. So when Shagun is 16 years old, there's somebody who delivers furniture, and he is attracted to the man who delivers furniture, and that's when he understands the nature of his desire. He doesn't label it as gay or queer, but he knows he's attracted to men, and therefore he cannot have the kind of life his father envisions for him, which is to have an arranged marriage and start a family. So he leaves home. So in that sense, he doesn't necessarily come out. Neither does Mark. His boyfriend never explicitly tells him that he's gay. But when the two men meet, there is a clear mutual attraction that they sense, and they just act on it. So rather than express it through speech, it's expressed through gestures, it's expressed through body language, and it's immediately understood. Those cues are understood and followed, and either people act against it or act in alignment with it. One of Shagun's fellow actors, Saya, is queer, so they both have this friendship that they develop. Yet again, those who are on the fringes sort of immediately recognize each other and form this sort of friendship, which I think in the US, with my friends of color, I know we have a special bond that we will always share. This idea of something that can just be ambient expression and not expression through language. And so I wanted queerness to be very much part of that kind of an ambient expression, but also then be expressed through the stories that characters tell.
Yeah. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then I'd love to bring in any questions from all of you. So if you could think of your questions while I ask this last one, which is role models and teachers are really significant presences in both of your books. And so I wonder if you could share with us who one of your role models were when you were either a young writer or a young performer, or whoever is sort of meaningful to you that felt significant or you felt their influence in the writing of these books, maybe.
Yeah. I had a lot of like drama teachers. That sounds so weird. I had a lot of drama teachers. No, I had. There were a lot of people that I feel like I should say thank you to. You know, there's so many, and in fact, in my first book, there's a math teacher, and I had a math teacher who I'm still friends with in middle school. I was a math lead in middle school, but I was also a kid who loved the theater. And when I was in middle school, I tried out for a community theater production, and there was a director, this woman named Kathy Grau, who then later taught at my school. She taught at the middle school when I was in high school. And so we were always in each other's worlds, and she was like such a huge mentor, and I think she was like the first person who was like, you're funny, and she also was like, even if you don't see yourself on a TV show, you can be an actor. And I do think that because of her, like I had the courage to like eventually go to theater school and then move to Los Angeles. And it's so funny, I remember she sat down with me one day and when I was in high school, and she was like, you're gonna go to Northwestern University, it's a great theater program, go to the Yale School of Drama if you wanna go to graduate school. And that's where I went. You know, like literally like did everything she said to do. And so there's a drama teacher in the school named Mrs. Reed who's, she makes a lot of mistakes. She makes a lot of mistakes along the way, but in a way I wanted to write an homage to teachers because I think teachers kind of saved my life in middle school. So, yeah.
I think with the writing of the book, one of my biggest teachers was a novel, which is Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things. It's I don't know if I'll ever love another novel as much as I've loved that book. The writers can be very obsessive, and I am. So I read that book every year for my birthday. So I've read it 16 times so far, and I want to keep that ritual for the next many, many years, because it's the way she sort of embodies the perspective of Esther and Rahel, the kids in the book, is just so incredible. She creates her own language almost, right, for these kids. The way kids see the world through their own language. There is so much that happens in that book that's awful, related to caste violence, related to post-colonial violence, and yet because there is this perspective of the kid, it's told through the eyes of such wonder and such joy that I just was amazed that a book could pull that off. There's that moment in the book where the kids come across the word cufflinks, and they say, oh, cufflinks is equal to cuff plus links. It was the first word in an otherwise nonsensical language that made complete sense to them. So I think that kind of perspective, being able to see the world through a child's lens, informed this book, in that it was, when you come out, suddenly everything around you feels different. When you realize that you are not of the crowd, that you are somebody whose desire will always be under scrutiny. You realize that about yourself. The way you see the world, the way you enter spaces changes, until sort of that identity becomes a part of your fabric, of your personality. And so even though Shagun's a little older than those characters in Arundhati Roy's book, because he comes out at 16, 17, and then when he leaves home and escapes, he's on the road, which is a completely new experience for him. So he has to constantly reinvent himself and again see the world through the inexperience, but also the innocence and wonder of the childhood brings. So her book was, I think, I've never met her in person. I'm sure I'd pass out if I did because of how much I love her book. But I'd say that was my biggest teacher. But as a person, Sabina Marie was my biggest influence, because I literally wouldn't be here, and this book wouldn't be a queer work of fiction if I'd never taken her class. So, and she's also very good with giving feedback on how time works in fiction, because I think with fiction the biggest thing is how you move from one point to another through time. Even though you're moving through pages, you're also moving through time. So narrative really is about the skillful manipulation of time, and I think that was something I got from her.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love hearing those stories.
Very
Great.
exciting.
So please, yeah. You have a couple also? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So please follow up outside for further conversation and signing. And thank you so much to our authors today.
Thank you. Thank you.